The battlefield was silent now, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence after death smoke, curled from the broken ground, drifting upward into the blood-red sky. The air smelled of burnt metal and ash. Somewhere far away, a massive starship groaned as it slowly sank into the cracked earth. In the middle of the wreckage lay a young alien girl, her body covered in dust and blood, her armor shattered. One arm twisted at an unnatural angle, her breathing shallow and uneven. She could still hear the faint echo of screams in her mind. Her friends, her squad, her family, all gone. The enemy had swept through like a storm, destroying everything, leaving nothing alive. They had not even bothered to check her pulse before leaving. They thought she was already dead. Her name was Lyra. The youngest scout of the Kailari defense unit, her people were proud warriors with silver eyes and skin marked by faint glowing lines, but now those lines were dim, almost gone. Her strength slipping away, she wanted to close her eyes and let the darkness take her. But every time she tried, the faces of her fallen friends appeared. Pulling her back in the distance, heavy footsteps echoed enemy patrols. Their voices low and cold, scanning for any movement. They were here to make sure nothing remained. Lyra's heart raced. She forced herself to stay still, her fingers clutching the jagged ground. Even the smallest sound could mean death. One soldier passed so close she could smell the oil on his armor. But he never looked down. Soon their voices faded into the smoke. For a moment, she thought she was alone again. But then she saw it, a shadow moving against the firelight, slow, careful. Different from the others, it was not the heavy stride of an enemy. It was lighter, quieter, yet with a strange purpose. She squinted through the smoke. Her vision blurry, the figure grew clearer, tall, broad-shouldered. Wearing dark armor with scratches from many battles, a helmet covered his face. But the symbol on his chest was unmistakable. A human soldier. Lyra's first thought was fear. Humans were dangerous, unpredictable, known for their stubborn courage in war. Her people had fought against them in the past, and the stories said they would rather die than spare an enemy. She tried to move away, but pain shot through her body. She let out a small gasp. Before she could stop herself, the human stopped. Turning his head toward her for a long moment, they stared at each other through the drifting smoke, his visor reflecting the flames, her silver eyes dim but still alive. He took a step forward, then another, until he stood over her broken form. His shadow blocking the light. Lyra braced herself, expecting a weapon, but instead he knelt beside her, his gloved hands moved quickly. Checking her wounds, his voice came through the helmet, deep and steady, though she couldn't understand all. The words, she knew the tone. It was not the voice of a killer. It was the voice of someone making a choice. He reached for something on his belt, a small device that hissed softly, and sprayed it over her wounds. A cool sensation spread through her torn skin. The bleeding slowed. Lyra's confusion grew. Why would a human help her? She was the enemy. She was supposed to die here, but when? She looked into his visor again. She saw no hatred, only determination. The ground shook suddenly, a low rumble rising into a deep roar somewhere nearby. An explosion tore through the ruins, sending dust and metal into the air. The human reacted instantly, scooping her up into his arms, her light frame barely slowing him down. He moved through the smoke with long, quick steps, scanning the shadows for danger. Every jolt of his movement sent waves of pain through her body, but she bit down on her lip. Refusing to cry out, they passed the broken skeleton of a dropship, its hull blackened and split open, a reminder of the battle that had ended only hours ago. Fires still burned inside. Casting flickering light on the human's armor, Lyra felt her consciousness slipping again. But she forced her eyes to stay open, her mind asking the same question again and again. Why is he saving me? Ahead, the sound of engines rumbled low. Maybe a vehicle, maybe another patrol. The human ducked into the shell of a collapsed bunker, crouching low until the noise faded inside. The air was thick with dust. The walls were cracked and broken, but it was cover. For now, he set her down gently against the wall, his hands moving to check the seal on his helmet, then pulling out a small water canister. He held it to her lips, and though she hesitated, her dry throat won the fight. The water was warm, but felt like life itself. The human spoke again. Slower this time, his tone calm, trying to reassure her. She caught fragments of words. Safe, help, not enemy. She wanted to believe him. But trust was not something easily given, especially after everything she had seen today. Still, his eyes behind the visor, though hidden, seemed to carry no threat outside. Distant gunfire rattled in the air. The war was still going on, but in this small broken shelter, there was only the sound of their breathing and the low hum of his armor systems. Lyra realized her fate had changed. The moment this human saw her, if he had walked past, she would be nothing more than another body on the field instead. For reasons she could not yet understand, he had chosen to carry her away from death. Her strength was gone, but as her eyes closed, she felt the strange weight of his promise. Unspoken but clear, she would not be left for dead again. The sound of war still echoed in the distance. But inside Captain Elias Kane's mind, there was only one thought. Keep her alive. He had carried wounded comrades before, men from his own unit. But never someone like her. Not an alien. Not the enemy. Her blood stained his armor, glowing faintly in the dark. A strange light that pulsed with every shallow breath she took. Elias had been moving alone when he found her. Cut off from his squad after the enemy's orbital strike, the ground assault had turned the once bustling outpost into a graveyard of steel and ash. He had no orders to rescue survivors from the other side. In fact, protocol said to leave them where they lay. But Elias had never been a man who followed the rules. When they clashed with his conscience, her body felt light in his arms. Too light for someone who should be strong and trained. Every step he took was a race against time, scanning the horizon for enemy patrols. The haze of smoke hiding both danger and hope. He could hear the hiss of his oxygen mask, the crunch of debris under his boots, and the faintest sound from her lips, a whisper in a language he didn't know, but it was filled with fear and explosion. Ripped through the ruins ahead, showering them with shards of metal, Elias dropped low. Shielding her with his own body, the heat washed over his back, but he didn't stop. His boots pounded the ground as he darted between cover. Moving like a shadow in the chaos, the enemy didn't see them, not yet, but every second felt heavier than the last. He found a narrow gap between two collapsed towers, slipping inside where the light was dim and the walls blocked the view. From above here, the smell of rust mixed with the damp air of an old maintenance tunnel. Elias set her down for a moment. Pulling a small med patch from his kit, pressing it gently over the wound on her side, she flinched, but didn't resist. The patch emitted a soft blue glow as it sealed torn flesh. Slowing the bleeding, her breathing steadied a little, but her eyes still looked far away, as if she was trapped somewhere deep in her own mind. He spoke softly, but hoping the tone would cut through the fog of pain. You're going to make it? I've got you, he said, his voice steady but low, the kind of voice that carried weight. A soldier's promise outside. The sound of engines roared again. Closer this time. Elias knew staying here meant death, but moving meant risk. He lifted her once more, his muscles straining under the combined weight of his gear and her armor, and stepped back into the war-torn streets, hugging the shadows. As if they were his allies, the world around them was a broken landscape of shattered walls, smoking craters, and the skeletal remains of machines that had once been mighty. The sky glowed with the fire of falling debris, meteors of metal raining down from ships burning in orbit. Every step forward was a choice between safety and speed, and Elias chose both, moving in short bursts, then freezing when danger loomed. His instincts honed by years of surviving impossible missions through the smoke. A drone's red eye flickered, scanning the ruins. Elias ducked behind a broken transport, crouching low. The alien girl in his arms barely moving. The drone passed by, its engines humming like a swarm of insects, disappearing into the distance. Elias exhaled slowly and pressed on somewhere in the chaos. Part of him wondered why he was doing this. Why he was risking his own life for someone his people had fought before. But when he looked down at her, he saw not an enemy, but someone who had been abandoned, left to die in the dirt, and he knew the answer, because no one deserved that. Not on his watch. The path ahead was long. The danger was greater than ever. But Elias Kane had made his decision. The night sky above was on fire, Streaks of burning metal cut across the darkness as ships fell from orbit. Each impact shaking the ground beneath Captain Elias Kane's boots. He moved fast, the alien girl's faint breath brushing against his neck, her head resting against his shoulder. Every second was borrowed time somewhere behind them. The low thump of heavy footsteps echoed, not the steady rhythm of a soldier on patrol, but the metallic clank of a war mech closing in. Elias ducked into a narrow alley between two collapsed buildings, his armor scraping against jagged metal, the air thick with dust and sparks from broken power lines. He could hear the mech scanning sensors whining as they searched for heat signatures. It's a mechanical voice calling out in the enemy's tongue, promising no mercy for survivors. Lyra stirred weakly, a soft sound leaving her lips. Elias whispered, "Stay with me," his voice barely audible over the distant explosions. The alley opened into a wide stretch of rubble, no cover, no shadows to hide in, only open ground littered with debris crossing it, men exposing themselves to everything hunting in the sky. He scanned quickly, spotting a half-destroyed transport pod. Across the open ground, its cockpit cracked, holes scorched black. But maybe still functional. It was their only chance. The mech's heavy footfalls grew louder, its targeting lasers sweeping dangerously close to the edge of the alley. Elias shifted his grip on her, tightening his hold, then ran, boots hit broken. Stone shards crunching underfoot, his breath steady, eyes locked on the transport pod ahead. The mech sensors caught movement. Its deep alarm blared, red beams locking on them as its cannons roared to life. The first blast hit the ground just behind him, shattering the pavement into molten fragments. The second blast cut past his side, the heat singing his armor. But Elias didn't slow. His legs moved like pistons, every muscle burning. A sharp whine in the sky made him glance up. A drone swarm was descending, black silhouettes cutting through the smoke, their weapons charging with a deadly glow. He swerved, using the falling debris from a collapsing tower as temporary cover. A rain of steel and concrete forcing the drones to pull back for a moment. The transport pod loomed closer, half buried in the rubble, its hatch jammed at an awkward angle. Elias slammed his shoulder into it, the metal groaning but holding. He tried again, pushing with every ounce of strength. It gave way with a loud crack, the hatch swinging inward inside. The pod smelled of burnt circuits and oil, panels flickering with weak power. He lowered Lyra into the passenger seat, her silver eyes opening just enough to meet his gaze before sliding closed again. He dropped into the pilot's chair, fingers flying over the controls. The screen flashed warnings in a language he couldn't read, but he knew enough about old transports to make them obey outside. The mech silhouette grew larger in the viewport, its weapons charging for the final shot. With a growl, Elias slammed the ignition, override the engines, coughed once, twice, then roared, shaking the entire pod. The mech fired, but the blast hit only dust and heat shimmer as the transport surged upward. Blasting through smoke and flame, they shot into the sky, the battlefield shrinking below them, the enemy's angry voices fading into static. Elias didn't look back for now. They were alive, but he knew survival was only the beginning. The transport pod drifted through the cold silence of space, its damaged engines humming unevenly, sparks still flickering from the cracked control panels. Captain Elias Kane kept one hand on the flight stick, the other resting protectively on the seat beside him where Lyra lay, her silver skin pale, her breathing slow but steady. The glow of distant stars reflected off her armor, making her look like a fragment of the galaxy itself. Fragile yet unbroken, he guided the pod toward a dark silhouette ahead, an abandoned mining station clinging to the side of a small asteroid, long forgotten by traders and smugglers alike. No heat signatures, no movement, only the cold promise of shelter. The pod shuddered as it docked, the old docking clamps groaning in protest, but holding just enough for him to force the hatch open inside. The air was stale and thin, the corridors lit only by flickering emergency lights. Dust floated in slow motion. Disturbed by his every step, he carried her deeper into the station, his boots echoing against the metal floor. Until he found a maintenance room with a working power unit, he set her down on a padded bench. Kneeling beside her, removing the twisted fragments of her armor piece by piece, Each plate revealed more injuries, deep cuts, burns, and bruises. Across her body, marks of both battle and betrayal from his pack, he pulled out the last of his field medkits. Opening a vial of regenerant gel, the smell was sharp and medicinal as he spread the gel across her wounds. The liquid glowing faint blue as it sank into her skin, knitting torn flesh together. She stirred at the touch, her silver eyes fluttering open for a moment. Confusion and fear mixing in their depths. Elias didn't speak much, just a quiet "You're safe here," the words carrying a weight she could feel even without understanding the language. He worked in silence. His hands steady despite the exhaustion pulling at his muscles. Every movement was careful, precise, as if he was afraid she might break if he pressed too hard. When he finished, covered her with a thermal blanket from the supply crate, the fabric thin but warm. Wrapping around her like a shield against the cold air of the station, Lyra tried to sit up, but her strength was gone. Her lips moved, forming words in her own language, soft and uncertain. Elias shook his head slowly, pointing to himself, then to her, then pressing his palm to his chest, a gesture of reassurance. Her gaze softened, just slightly, the fear fading enough for her eyes to close again. Outside, the station creaked under the slow pull of the asteroid's orbit, the metal groaning like an old ship in the deep. Elias sat against the wall, his rifle across his knees, his eyes never leaving her. Every instinct told him the galaxy wouldn't let this moment of calm last, but for now, in this small pocket of safety, she was alive, and he intended to keep it that way. The soft hum of the mining station's old power core was the only sound in the room. The air cold but calm, faint blue light spilling from a cracked panel onto Lyra's face. Her breathing had steadied, but her eyes opened slowly, as if waking from a deep nightmare. Elias was still there, sitting on the floor near the bench, his rifle beside him, one hand resting lightly on his knee, watching her without speaking for a moment. Neither of them moved, their eyes meeting in silence. Then Lyra spoke, her voice quiet, the words broken, her language twisting in ways Elias couldn't understand. She saw the confusion on his face and stopped, frustration flashing in her silver eyes. She pressed her hand to her chest and tried again, this time slower, using gestures, pointing to herself. Then lifting her hand toward the ceiling, then curling her fingers downward in a motion like falling. Elias understood enough. She was telling him she had come from above. From orbit, he moved closer, kneeling so they were at eye level. Pulling a small translator device from his belt, it was damaged, screen cracked, but still functional enough to catch fragments of speech. He handed it to her, pointing at his own mouth and then at hers. Encouraging her to try, Lyra hesitated, then spoke into the device. Static filled the air, broken words forming in a rough, artificial voice betrayed. "Left behind," Commander said. "No rescue." The translator stuttered. Elias's jaw tightened. She wasn't just a survivor. She had been abandoned by her own people. Her eyes darkened as she continued, the words halting but heavy. "We were fighting on two fronts. Humans on one side, another enemy on the other. My unit was ordered to hold the line. The order was a lie." She took a shaky breath. Her fingers curling into the blanket around her, they pulled back, left us to die so the others could escape. The truth hung in the air, heavier than the cold around them. Elias had seen betrayal before, but hearing it from someone who still carried the wounds made it hit harder. He thought of the bodies on the battlefield, the silence when he had found her, the kind of silence that came when no one came back. For Euler's voice broke as she finished, "I was the last. I watched them fall. I thought death would come too, but you—" She stopped, her gaze locking on him. "You came." Elias didn't answer right away, just looked at her, seeing not the enemy he had been trained to fight, but someone who had been crushed under the same war that had scarred him. Finally, said in a low, steady voice, "I don't leave people behind." Her silver eyes searched his face for a moment, as if weighing those words, and for the first time since he had found her, the fear in her gaze began to fade, replaced by something else, something that looked a little like trust. The mining station's walls groaned in the silence, but inside, the air between Elias and Lyra was far from still. Her strength had returned just enough for her to stand. Though her steps were careful, each movement heavy with purpose, she knew Longer looked like the fragile figure he had carried through fire. Her eyes burned now. Silver light cutting through the cold air. Elias tightened the straps on his armor, his rifle resting against the bench. Checking every clip and charge pack, he didn't need to ask if she was ready the way she stood. Shoulders squared despite the pain. Told him everything. Their plan was madness. Return to the ruins they had barely escaped. Slip past enemy patrols and search for survivors who might still be hidden beneath the wreckage. The enemy would expect no one to come back, which was exactly why they had a chance. Lyra had drawn a map on a piece of old station metal. Using a heated blade to carve rough lines, she marked the location of a collapsed shelter. One she believed still held members of her unit. Her voice was steady as she explained through the translator. If they live, they are trapped. No comes, no food. Elias only nodded. Sealing his helmet with a sharp hiss, the transport pod's engines groaned as they powered up. The old machine trembling under the strain through the cracked cockpit window. The battlefield slowly came into view, the same broken towers and burning craters. But now, with more enemy patrols sweeping the ruins above, the sky glowed faint red from the distant fires of orbiting warships. Casting a bloody light over the ground, they landed in the shadow of a shattered factory, the pod's hull blending. With the wreckage, Elias stepped out first, rifle raised, scanning the area, while Lyra moved close behind, her weapon drawn from a fallen soldier they had found in the station's storage bay. The air here was thick, with the stench of burned metal and something worse, the smell of death lingering between the stones. They moved fast, using broken walls and scorched vehicles for cover. Every sound seemed too loud. The crunch of boots on gravel, the faint hum of enemy drones somewhere above. A sudden flash of red light swept across the ground. Patrol's scanner beam. Elias pulled her into the shadow of a crumbling wall, holding her still until the beam passed. Finally, they reached the collapsed shelter. Half buried under steel beams and rubble, Lyra's breath caught when she heard it faint. Muffled banging from below, she dropped to her knees, clawing at the debris with her bare hands, Elias joining in. Using his strength to shove aside twisted metal, the noise grew louder, desperate voices calling out in her language. Filled with disbelief, they were alive, but before they could free them, a low mechanical growl rolled through the ruins. Followed by the heavy steps of something massive closing in, Elias looked up. The glow of enemy optics burning through the smoke. They had been found. The ground shook under the weight of the approaching war mech, its steel legs crushing debris with every step. Red targeting beams cut through the smoke, sweeping over the ruins, locking on the collapsed shelter where Elias and Lyra stood. The survivors trapped below pounded the metal from inside, voices rising in panic. Elias didn't hesitate. He shoved Lyra toward the rubble. "Get them out," he said sharply, raising his rifle toward the glowing eyes in the smoke. Lyra's hands moved fast, tearing away chunks of debris, her breath ragged. Shouting encouragement to those trapped beneath the mech's cannon roared, a blast tearing through the wall beside Elias. Shards of stone and metal sprang across his armor. He rolled behind cover, returned fire, the sharp crack of his shots echoing through the ruins, his aim hitting the mech's sensors, making it stagger but not fall. Another drone swarm appeared overhead, their engines screaming, weapons charging with a deadly glow. Lyra finally pulled free the first survivor, a soldier from her unit. Face pale, eyes wide, then another, and another. They scrambled to help, all of them working together to clear the last section of rubble. But the mech was charging now, its massive frame crushing the ground with each step. Alice grabbed a fallen missile launcher from the wreckage. Slamming a fresh round into the chamber, he stepped out from cover, the red glow of the mech's targeting laser cutting across his chest. He didn't flinch. He fired. The missile streaked through the smoke, slamming into the mech's core. A blinding flash tore through the battlefield, the explosion shaking the ruins, metal shrieking as the war machine collapsed in a burning heap. The survivors were free now, standing together in the open air for the first time since the battle began. Lyra turned to Elias, her silver eyes shining, not just with relief but with something deeper, gratitude that carried more weight than words. He gave a short nod, scanning the horizon, making sure no new threats closed in. When the transport pod lifted off minutes later, it carried more than just the living. It carried a story, eh? Human soldier and an alien survivor had walked into the heart of death and come back with life across the galaxy. When the tale spread, it sparked something far greater than a single victory. It became proof that courage could cross battle lines, that loyalty could break the rules of war, and that sometimes the one you were taught to fear could be the one who saved you.